ourselves, nothing happens.
That's the thing. So we
So
need.
we're very happy to have her.
In fact, Kenya we have he for she.
Yeah, we have that here too.
He for she campaign. It's doing very well.
We've been very involved.
Cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was explaining to Peter that I'll probably say this again, but APCO's majority women owned as a firm globally, so we have a special responsibility not only to that.
I agree with you. I totally agree.
So when we do the we're calling the countries to see, so like if we go first and then I think that's the way it is. And then I think Mexico is next, and then
Okay. How do you constitutionalize this?
so you can say keywords on what your policy is, the chief of the government, and then like keep it short, and then we'll do other things with you.
I'm not the one.
And this is Nidhi is going to talk to us about Mexico.
Yes.
Well, this is just, and then I'll be asking some questions. They'll be able to.
Just
For two reasons. First, because nobody speaks Creole.
Well, we're going to try to.
Nobody speaks 3 minutes?
No.
They speak longer? They do at the UN meeting, that's for sure.
Oh, they absolutely.
3 minutes is just getting warmed
I
up
work.
at the
We
UN.
do want to work at the UN, but want to? Yeah. No, but to sit up here because of the what we can do at the. Well, what I wanted to do is there were 2 other people, in Pizza who were speaking first.
Well, are we supposed to be
See them.
seated and then?
No, I don't think I think I just was, usually we save the first row for that, but they're not letting people sit there because of the. See them? Maybe.
No. It's Claire will be. No, Claire will be very close.
Oh, you can't?
Not here.
Why? Well, she's speaking.
Yes, it will block your faces.
You know what, Seema? Maybe we'll get 2 more chairs after people.
So sorry.
either way. So whatever's easier.
Well, I just think it's easier than like going
Stomping up and down.
And you're right at the beginning.
I'm at the end, so I have.
Oh, you're in the right.
I have. Yeah.
So maybe just take
Yeah.
a seat at the end.
Thank you so much. Mine as well.
Also, we gave it.
Yes, this.
Well, Harriet should be up here.
Also, she should see it now, or on the
Sharing our session.
Or there, wherever you're comfortable. Unless they're trying to.
So you're saying this?
Yes.
They're keeping it open
Yes.
for the video. Okay, could we ask everybody to take their seats? There should be some more seats up here, and there's an overflow room if we need it. Are we okay? I'm just anxious to get started because we have such great speakers and we're going to have such a good discussion. I don't want to waste any time. So my name is Marjorie Krause. I'm the founder and executive chairman of APCO Worldwide, which we're very proud to host this with Data 2X today. And I just thought I'd tell you that one of the reasons that we think this is such an important discussion is not only its impact on the world, but APCO. If you don't know, APCO, which is about to celebrate its 40th birthday, as the founder, that's very hard for me to say because it seems like a blink of an eye. But APCO is the largest majority woman-owned firm globally in our field. And so we feel that getting involved in discussions that help to elevate and increase the status of women in the world is very much a part of our mission. And so we're very happy and proud to be part of this very important discussion. And I personally, as somebody who built a firm raising 3 children and now 9 grandchildren, I am taking care of parents and the whole thing. I understand the care economy from the bottom up and the top down. And there's probably no more important discussion for women for the future and for men, because if we can unleash the power of people who, and celebrate what women do in the world, I think that we're all better off for it. I wrote a book, which maybe we should bring some copies down if anybody wants it, but it's about 10 things I learned from motherhood. It's called Roots and Wings, to help build and scale the business. And we're now about 1,200 people from scratch. So it's lessons, and the reason I wrote the book is I wanted there to be value to what you do at home, and you bring your whole self to work. And that way, we can celebrate all the things that we do in a care economy, and all the things we learn that people maybe just take for granted, but intuitively you learn by being part of a family, part of a system. And so that's my passion and the reason I'm happy to be here today. We do have an exciting discussion, and we have some people to lead it off. So I wanted to start by introducing Millie, who's with us, and she's the technical secretary for the Global Alliance for Care, and has a lot of experience in this field. And she has experience both in, I think, in Spain and in Mexico. Is that correct? Oh, there you are. I was looking for you. And has going to set the stage for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. So, dear Honorable Harriet Chigai, Women's Rights Advisor to the President of Kenya, dear Nadine Gassman, President of the National Women's Institute of Mexico, dear Peter McDougall, Assistant Deputy Minister for the Global Issues and Development, Global Affairs Canada, dear Fatin Sina Hassan, Africa Director, Oxfam International, and dear Sima Halam, Deputy Director of the Gender Equality Policy Advocacy and Communications at the Gates Foundation. Dear friends and colleagues, here in the room and virtually, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this event that is named Building Evidence for Policy Action on the Care Economy. And these conversations and the event itself are crucial to advance gender equality and gender justice, to promote women's rights and help our societies to progress towards a new social organization that puts care at its center. We are here to discuss what is needed for a systems level change in care policy globally, regionally, nationally, and even locally, including the realm of data generation, We are joined by high-level representatives from the governments of Canada, Kenya, and Mexico, who are leaders on care initiatives and will share their learnings from across their countries and regions. We have noted that it is urgent to discuss the importance of investing in care and provide high-level political guidance on the matter. And doing so in the framework of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly is a great opportunity to think about the care agenda towards the 2030 agenda. One guiding question for today is, how can we as decision makers move towards a care society that promotes the well-being of every person and takes care of the planet as well? Countries all around the world have committed themselves to achieving the SDG 5.4, that it's recognized recognize and value unpaid care and domestic work through the provision of public services, infrastructure, and social protection policies, and the promotion of shared responsibility within the household and the family as nationally appropriated. But what improvements have been achieved? What is the situation of women today in terms of caregiving? Around the world, care is primarily provided by women and girls. According to the ILO, women spend 3 times as much time on this work as men. Unpaid care and domestic work worldwide are equivalent to approximately 9% of the global gross domestic product. That is a contribution around 11 trillion US dollars, so it's not a tiny one, it's something that we have to look at it. And women, of course, are the ones who are 75% doing of this work. So how we balance this, how we advance on this? Despite the enormous contribution of the well-being of our societies, care work remains invisibilized and undervalued. Many caregivers professions are mistakenly viewed as unskilled or as an extension of the natural and traditional role of women as caregivers. This is one of the stereotypes that contributes to their low status, low pay, lack of rights, and lack of representation. And those are the kind of things we need to change, not only the stereotypes, but the policies towards making those changes. Let me introduce briefly what is the Global Alliance for Care. Co-convened by the government of Mexico through the National Institute of Women in Mujeres, where Nadine is here, and the UN Women, this groundbreaking global community was launched during the Generation Equality Forum in 2021 as a collective multi-stakeholder platform that is facilitating and fostering spaces for dialogues, analysis, research, data, advocacy actions, multilateralism work, and learning and sharing about experiences. This is a platform where diverse stakeholders articulate to share best practices and to learn from one another, and also to have discussions like, do we need to define the right of care as a human's right, or can we get the right of care as a cross-cutting right in all the spectrum of the policies, health, education, well-being, social security, etc., even housing, no? So these kind of analysis and discussions are facilitated by the Global Alliance for Care, just to give you an example. And to improve in a collective way the recognition, that's the other thing, the 5 R's we are promoting as the Global Alliance for Care is the recognition, reduction, redistribution, reward of care work, as well as the representation of caregivers and care receivers in every decision involving them. We are, of course, in favor of the rights of the caregivers and the decent pay, etc., but we are also as well of the rights of the people, the care receivers. So the elderly people, the children, the disabled, the communities themselves needs to define what they want to be cared about, you see. Okay, this event, along with you, I am inviting you to join the Alliance. I would like to open the building evidence for policy action on care economy to those who, with the call of those who are on the panel, but also all who are listening to us here and online, to work together with and within the Global Alliance for Care to position care society as a transformative paradigm of a new eco-social contract where people and the planet and the environment are at the center, and it's not only the profits, how we transform with the care agenda this paradigm in favor of all the people and the planet as a whole. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for setting the stage for us. And then I'd like to call up, I guess everybody can hear me either way. I have a pretty loud voice. But I'd like to also ask Krista Jones-Baptista to come up and tell us about why Data2X is interested in this. And we look forward to hearing from you. And then we'll get into our panel. Thank you. Okay. You can't hear? No. Right at the back here, we can't hear. Okay, well, thank you for telling us, because we want you to be very much a part of the discussion. So can you deal with the volume? If you can't hear again, raise your hand and we'll do something down here, okay? So everybody will also speak up.
Thank you, Marjorie. I'm Krista Jones-Baptista, and on behalf of Data2X, we are pleased to be co-hosting today's event. I'd like to thank all of our co-hosts for your partnership on this important topic. Here on the sidelines of UNGA and SDG Summit, we have the opportunity and responsibility to think through ways to impact and improve the lives of carers and carees around the globe. The world's leaders have begun to recognize the economic and social value of care, as well as the gender and other inequities that characterize the care economy. Policy interventions have lagged behind awareness, and turning that around starts with data. At the foundational level, data can shine a light on systemic inequities and has the power to illuminate a path for action. That's why we at Data2X support and challenge governments, philanthropy, civil society, and the private sector to collect, analyze, and use gender data for action to reach gender equality. What an honor to be in this room today with 3 government champions, Canada, Kenya, and Mexico, coming together to discuss the importance of using data to drive policy action on an issue that's a cornerstone of so many communities, critical to sustainable development, and personal for so many of us, care. And we recognize at the same time that building the evidence base for paid and unpaid care issues will require significant financial investment and political will, yet the cost of inaction is greater. Care work is a neglected policy priority because it is often unpaid or underpaid, because it is mostly done by women, and because it often goes unmeasured. Progress has been made, however. In 2013, the International Conference of Labor Statisticians recognized that care is work. And in doing so, recognized care work has economic and social value, and that it needs to be measured just as we do employment, productivity, and other critical labor statistics. The adoption of the SDGs further underscored the value of care and domestic work, with an indicator specifically dedicated to time spent on care. And then with the COVID-19 pandemic, unpaid care became more a part of our everyday discourse, even further highlighting the value of this work during a time of crisis. But since 2000, less than half of possible countries have collected time use data on SDG indicator 5.4.1, the hours spent in a day on care work by caregivers. That's why Data2X recently partnered with the ILO, the International Labor Organization, the World Bank, and the UN Statistics Division to design some new approaches to measuring time use and updating data collection of unpaid care work. Governments have the tools. Now they must use them. They need to capture disaggregated data to enable intersectional analysis, capture data on care responsibility over the full course of women's and girls' lives, not just during their reproductive or working years. And most critically, governments must use the data to effectively guide policymaking. We need to recognize and measure women's time and unpaid care work. And we know that data on social norms and care can inform interventions as well. Interventions that aim to shift attitudes, beliefs, and ultimately behaviors for a more equitable redistribution of care. And combining this data with research on more and better project-level data collection on new technologies, such as clean cook stoves or solar-powered water pumps, can reduce that burden of care globally. Countries must lift care workers up by investing in data-informed services like early childhood education and long-term care, infrastructure like public transit and piped water, supportive workplace policies like equal paid parental leave and paid sick leave, and in social protection like disability benefits and cash transfers for carers. And critically, we must invest in the data we need to track the social and economic returns of these policies and guide their implementation. While this is the job of governments, advocates must also play a role in holding governments accountable. And our focus should not be limited to just unpaid care work. The paid care workforce will top 530 million jobs by 2030. And this work is also often low wage and performed under poor working conditions with limited labor and social protections. In higher income countries, it's disproportionately performed by poor, racialized, and immigrant women. Better data on this large and growing segment of the care economy can inform policy to raise the standard of work for paid care workers while also ensuring sustainable care systems for everyone. And of course, global crises are increasingly understood to impact the amount, distribution, and conditions of paid and unpaid care work that is disproportionately carried out by women and girls globally. An investment in care only strengthens resilience as countries face these crises. It will take all of us to make progress, but again, we have the tools and the collective knowledge. By measuring unpaid care work and its impact on paid care, tracking public policies and investments in the care economy and their social and economic returns, documenting the size and characteristics of the paid care sector, and monitoring the impact of global crises on paid and unpaid care work. By doing all of these things, we can harness the power of gender data to drive systems-level change, to make the care economy more equitable and improve the lives of caregivers and those they care for worldwide. I look forward to hearing from our partners and colleagues today on their efforts to do just that. Thank you, and back to you, Marjorie.
Thank you. We're going to move to the panel. I want to make sure you can still hear back there. Everything is good? Okay, because we don't want to miss one bit of this. It's really an important discussion, and data certainly will underscore that. You know, we're going to only solve this problem or create more opportunity by having this be across public, private, and government sectors. And so this panel represents our effort to learn best practice from government, to understand kind of what NGOs are doing in Oxfam, and then to be able to bring that all together to say, what can we do going forward to address this problem? What kind of, can we do a little bit of a stock take about where we are? 3 countries that have done wonderful things, what can we learn from them? And then how do we bring all that together so we can move forward together? And I want to start by introducing the Honorable Harriet Chigao. Is that how? Chigao? From Kenya. And she's the women's rights advocate to the President of Kenya. And so why don't you start and tell us a little more about what's going on in Kenya and how you got there.
All right. Thank you very much, Marjorie. First of all, we are truly honored as the Kenyan government to have been invited and to co-host this event with our counterparts. And this is the right time to have this discussion on matters care economy. We'll all agree that the care economy is still a subject that most countries are grappling with. It's a new entity. In as much as we are still slowly picking it up, I must say that the Kenyan government has done quite something in terms of putting in place a time survey. And the same survey has not yet been launched, which we are planning to launch in the next few months. And with that, then we'll be able to build on the evidence that we can then use to do proper analysis on matters unpaid care work and contribute towards the economy of the country. We must also say that the country also, Kenya, through the Ministry of Public Service, Gender and Affirmative Action, is already working on a care economy policy. And once we have the time survey up, it will actually put in place a good measure in terms of how does the policy fit in. And this policy, I want to believe, is going to assist us in formulation of the unpaid care work policy, and that will kickstart as soon as the SAID is launched and the same process is completed. So for me, I think the Kenyan government has really put the first foot forward in terms of even entrenching the women agenda within its economic empowerment program. The women are sitting right into the better economic plan. So small steps, but we are getting there. Thank you very much.
Well, congratulations for all you're doing. We really appreciate that.
Oh, and I might say that I'm actually the data champion.
Well, you have to get together afterwards.
We are in safe hands.
Data is so important because without that, we really won't know if we made progress.
Oh, sure.
So, very good. Nadine Gassman is the president of the National Institute for Women of Mexico. And how about Nadine, if you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Mexico?
Well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here with everybody, with this group of partners. And what can I say? Evidence is crucial. I think care has been an issue for the feminist movement for 30 years. And we have done a lot, have talked a lot, but until we started putting numbers, both in terms of what is the time women spend, like in Mexico is 3 times the time men spend in care and domestic work, which is about 40 hours a week, which means that there's not much time to do other things, because the day for men and women are 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no time to, we all, and I love it because we all say, yes. We all do that because we know what does it mean. No? So for us, since 2002, based on the commitment of the Institute of Statistics, the National Institute of Women, the feminist movement, we started doing the time, how you say that in English? The National Survey on the use of time use. And we start seeing and becoming more sophisticated in terms of direct, indirect, etc. Then what we did is say, well, what that means in terms of what really matters, money. And then we came with the statistic that about the amount of work women do in Mexico is about 21% of GDP. There's very little, there's no, I would say, no industry that produces 21% of GDP. So we started having this conversation. We have the tools, we have used these tools in a very systematic way to really do that. Then we came into government, a different government, the government of President López Obrador, and one of the main issues the Ministry of Finance had is how we get more women into the workforce. So I was called by the Minister of Finance, and I was asked that question. I thought he was going to cut my budget, honestly. But then he said, how do we get more women into the formal workforce? And I said, it's the care system. And then he became a champion, and we started working. And then next time he said, Nadine, how much that costs? And I said, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. So then we did, with UN Women and ECLAC, studies on the cost of universal child care, care for the elderly, care for the people with disability. And we found out that it's not a cost, it's an investment. And that we need to invest in these services, provision, etc. That's some of the things we are doing, but I want to end up say this part, because we'll have
more.
another part.
You will definitely have more time.
Okay. Saying that we developed our own unpaid work simulator and found out that it's a lot of money that we are producing by doing unpaid work. And also we develop, and that's the latest, a map of care, a care map for Mexico. And that it's a geo-referenced information of all the services that we have in Mexico, which are about 96,000, public, private, from Social Security, and where they are in every place. And this map is done first for citizens, for women, basically, to see what are the closest, the most accessible services for care, but also for decision makers. So if I'm a mayor, I want to know what the care services are in my city or in my rural area and see where I can invest. And we had found things that we didn't know. For example, that about a third of the population needs care services, that we have much more services for children than for the elderly, and we are a population that is getting old. And that's the way we want, and it has become very interesting because it's a very visual tool to see where things are and who has access and where you can find them. That's some of the things we're doing.
Thank you. So Peter McDougall is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Global Issues and Development of Global Affairs in Canada. And Peter, I wonder, not only could you tell us about Canada, but since you're the only male on the panel, that maybe you can also tell us, I think I've said for a long time, these things don't get done unless we talk across gender, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how you got interested in this and what we can do to incentivize others.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Marjorie, and thanks to the organizers of the panel. Canada's also very delighted to be part of this. We have a very, I think, compelling story to tell domestically and internationally, and really great to be with such distinguished panelists, so thank you. Canada's government, and frankly, in some ways, successive governments have been committed to supporting gender equality, both in the domestic and international assistance context. In 2021, our Prime Minister, who will be flying into New York shortly, announced a $100 million standalone care program. And that's in the context of a feminist international assistance policy. So we, I think, had one of the first or second international assistance policy with a feminist lens and a feminist perspective. And it was transformational in the way we do international development in a period of really 5 or 6 years, where literally every single dollar that we spend, some exceptions in humanitarian assistance, has to hit a high gender equality target. A lot of our initial investments have been predominantly in health and education and to some extent in climate, which takes me to care. So care was not, until very recently, a main feature of our development program, and I don't want to pretend that it was. So in preparing for this Prime Minister's announcement of a $100 million standalone care program 2 years ago, we did an assessment of our internal programming, and we did find that paid and unpaid care work was integrated into some of our development initiatives, but maybe in 1 or 2 cases was the central focus of the work. So focusing on a really unique investment was one way for us to really bring out the importance of the care economy. So far, in the context of this funding envelope, we've got 6 gender transformative projects with civil society and multilateral partners. These projects support domestic workers' rights, quality childcare services, and gender-responsive policies. I want to flag an Oxfam project, since they are also the host of this event, and sponsor Time to Care, which is a new project with Oxfam Canada in Kenya that aims to address inequalities in both paid and unpaid care by supporting gender-equitable social norms and gender-transformative practices and policies, which, as all of you know, is critical to advancing care work. You all know the 5R framework very well, and so all of these 6 initiatives, projects that we've funded, take that into account. We're looking at a number of new projects that respond to the rights and needs of paid care workers. And then I want to say a bit about the domestic context, because it's really, in some ways, I think, what has informed the political direction that we've received to do care internationally. And so, like in many countries, early learning in childcare has been you said 30 years, has been a central part of the social policy debate in Canada. You've gone from nothing to very expensive daycares to giving people money every month to what we have now. And I'll say a bit more later about the province of Quebec. But so also in 2021, which is a big year for care internationally and domestically for Canada, the government made a $30 billion 5-year funding commitment to build a Canada-wide early learning childcare system, working with our provincial and territorial and Indigenous partners. And the goal here is a target of $10 a day daycare, creating 250,000 new regulated, high-quality childcare spaces by 2026. So really, in the context of our domestic and international assistance, we're going for the triple win for children and for all those cared for women and gender equality, and for economies and societies. And maybe just very quickly, Marjorie, I can't claim a long history, except that I was obviously, as a man, a beneficiary of substantial care. But as I was
Thank you for recognizing
Oh,
that.
yeah, no,
all for all the mothers in the
all the mothers and grandmothers and sisters. But I was sitting here and recalling, though, that in the early 1990s, and I'll say more about Quebec in a moment, as Quebec was preparing what was then, I think, $5 or $7 a day care program, I worked with a community loan institution in Montreal, and I went out and did a survey of existing daycares to see what their financial needs were and to see if these were concessional loans. And these were extraordinarily entrepreneurial women, exclusively, who had started up, at this time, small for-profit businesses. And they really needed a leg up from and banks wouldn't lend to them because they were considered too high risk. And so this firm, this nonprofit that I work for, had modest amounts of money, so we were able to do some small loans to help them get started. And then the government stepped in with major investments. Thank you.
Fantastic. Do you want to tell us about Oxfam and what you're doing to support this effort and your new programs?
Sure. Thank you very much, and thank you for agreeing to be here and for hosting us, Marjorie. You have reminded us, Marjorie, how important this issue is. Almost $11 billion per year worth. And I would add this is even more than the global tech industry in terms of value. So this is quite an important issue. But when you focus on the continent, the African continent, you'll see that women, especially the ones in rural areas, are facing the greatest time constraints, especially in areas where they have to spend time collecting water, collecting wood, and also preparing food, which also takes a lot of time. In most of places, piped water to homes is not the standard, so this means they have to spend almost 71% of the time, or 71% of the household water is collected by women. So we know that care work is the backbone of our societies. It's the backbone of our communities. It's what is ensuring that communities and families are nourished, they're healthy, they're thriving. And without unpaid care work, our homes, our communities, our workplace, they would come to a standstill. we know that the critical nature of care work is essential to the realization of human potential. I came across an infographic about how great people spend their day. So you'll see how Voltaire, Immanuel Kant, Murakami spend their day. And it's fascinating because there's a lot of time that is dedicated to resting, sleeping, and then
Oh my God.
Reading, writing.
yes, creative work, and then eating, and then leisure. And then a little bit of other. And you'll see Maya Angelou has a little bit of other. So you'll find that maybe she was the one doing her own cooking and cleaning. But for Kant to be Kant, for Voltaire to be Voltaire, for Murakami to be Murakami, some women had to invest their time for them to be this. And then who has reaped the benefit of this investment? They have not made it into the history books, these women. So it's high time that we acknowledge the value of care work. We can only commend all of you for coming together and for helping us advance this very important agenda. And hopefully we'll get a time to dig into what are the core elements and what needs to be focused on. As Oxfam, what we're doing to advance this agenda, we have engaged communities, we have engaged countries, we have also engaged African Union as an institution to advocate for culture and policy transformation. We work with allies, with partners, with supporters to produce and disseminate knowledge products so that we can have some kind of objective basis for conversation. In 2021, we published the Care Policy Scorecard. This is a practical tool that assesses and tracks how governments' policies are adopted, budgeted, and implemented for transformational effect on care. And we launched this scorecard in 2022 at the African Union Summit. So in the African context, we are at the forefront of the issue. We are telling heads of states and governments that this matter cannot be placed on the back burner, despite all the challenges, economic challenges, political instability, security challenges. This has to be dealt as a priority if we want to achieve gender equality.
Well, if we want people to be able to do, if we want people to be able to do their jobs, somebody's got to be behind them. Mm-hmm. So, I would say it's all the same thing, right? If you want ministers or if you want generals out there, who's watching the kids, So I think there's a very good case to be made, and I commend all the speakers for their role in trying to address this issue. So what I'd like to do is throw open a couple of questions that maybe I'd love to be able to walk away from here, not only with a bit of a stock take, but with some tangible ideas about what we can all take away to our respective places that will make a difference. So maybe we can just run through, maybe you can focus on what you think are a couple of challenges to this and a couple of opportunities. And maybe we can come away with some very tangible things. Okay. Harriet, you want to start?
All right, thank you. I'll go first. For me, I think the best investment that governments can do is on this particular policy of unpaid care work. Why do I say that? I want to believe most governments will look at it as a high risk because of the injection of finances into it. But I also want to give the governments hope by saying the higher the risk, the higher the investment. We have actually seen in this discussion, 75% of women are within this space. So the question then is, if we manage to tap into the 75% of the workforce within each country and inject support within that space, it means the GDP of our countries will go up. And that is the true reality. When you look at governments like mine, the President, His Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto, actually signed a women's charter with the women. And you realize within the charter, issues to do with climate, and women was well factored in terms of clean cooking, which is a very big problem within the African continent. What that tells me on matters also economic empowerment and investments, which is also a key pillar when we look at women within the workforce and within the unpaid care work, we realize if we inject more into the women, we'll be able to gain more as a society. So you find that we have the political goodwill. We are now in the process of discussing policies. We have done the surveys. So the question then is, how do we go to implementation and how do we measure what we are doing? Data. Data is the only option when it comes to this. I wish to thank Data2X because they have partnered with my office as well in terms of collection of data. We are now moving into about 7 counties. And once that data is collected, we do proper analysis, we'll then be able to provide solutions pegged on evidence. So for me, that is a plus, despite the fact that this is a new entry. We are yet to conceptualize. Everybody is thinking, what is this unpaid care work? And when we look at our cultural biases, you realize the work that women were sanctioned to do is almost divine. But the question then is, they have been resilient, they have been working hard for many years, to an extent that we have not looked at women's value in terms of what they are putting on the table. So for me then, that becomes very important. And I would wish also to point out that in terms of the solutions and opportunities which are there, we need to leverage on the opportunities and the goodwill that the government have put in place. And then we all move forward in terms of advocacy, in terms of putting in place measures to ensure that whatever it is that we are doing, we'll be able to measure the results. We also have opportunities when it comes to policies. You know, how then do we actualize the policies and how do we sensitize what the policies contain? So in my office, we are fashioning a program, Safe Home, Safe Spaces, which is going to unpack the cultural well-being of women and girls. And within that space, we want to use it in terms of sensitizing Kenyans and to fashion how we review the thinking process around women and girls. So we look at that as one of the key opportunities that we do have to shape and change the cultural biases that we've had over time. We also need to have and invest in terms of financial support, including all the work that is already going through. And with that, we see a high possibility where, with the government goodwill that we have, we need to inject more, we need to advocate for more finances within that space. And I think that will be a very good thing. Within the SDG 5, it requires that countries do segregate data in terms of sex, age, and location, which is something that is still lacking. You find within our spaces we analyze the data between the ages of 15 and above, and we forget the ages between 15 to 0, and we also forget the ages between, I would say, 50 or 60 and above. And within that space, you find the women and girls falling within that space are also, they contribute a lot within the unpaid care work. And we need now to segregate data and use that for evidence-based research and solutions. So I would look at that in terms of solutions.
So Peter, we'll just go down the line. What can you add to that? Or how much do you agree with? What are you doing that's different?
Okay. Well, I'll go through a few challenges. So one first is that, and I think that you touched on this, investment in care and care workers is still often seen as an expense rather than an investment, and therefore it's not often prioritized, particularly in times of fiscal constraint. And this is where data and investment can play a critical role in showing how important care work, investment in care work is. There's a lack of contextually grounded data, particularly around what works, and especially in terms of the effectiveness of different care policies. It's not differentiated. I mean, all women and girls are not the same. We can't continue to treat women as a homogeneous group. We have to think of, you talked about this essentially on disaggregation, age, disability, migration status, ethnicity. rural or urban, these all influence women's and girls' lived experiences of unpaid and paid care work. And so a gender-based analysis that's taking an intersectional approach will be important to allow for good assessments of policy effectiveness. Also a lack of concerted effort across policy actors, fragmentation. I think we talked about, in the context of making, sustainable economic growth, all the different aspects that lead to that need to reinforce the care system, and that's not happening. The projects that we're funding through our $100 million investment are trying to address some of these challenges. So, for example, we're making a contribution to the World Bank's Invest in Childcare initiative, and that's supporting the development of the evidence base to make the case for childcare and the tools and systems needed by countries to design effective policies and services. So those are the challenges. Opportunities are emerging. First of all, I think care work has really been made much more visible by the COVID pandemic, greater awareness of its importance. It's also become more apparent how much the unequal distribution of unpaid care work and the low quality of many paid care work opportunities undermines women's and girls' rights and hinders the achievement of multiple SDGs. It's also clear both within households and policy contexts that care work is essential for human well-being, good functioning of society, and sustainable economic growth. And so we have to harness the momentum that's been built. I think here in Generation Equality Forum was a great galvanizer, but we need to continue to build on that. Partnerships are critical across private sector, philanthropies, researchers, NGOs, and so the Global Alliance of Care, I think, is one of those organizations that we all need to continue to support and build on, and so that's another fantastic opportunity. Thank you.
Nadine, why don't we hold the applause until the end? First of all, we'll have a little more time, and then it's not competition either. So this is something we're all in together. So, yeah, Nadine.
Well, I think we need to grasp the idea that what we are proposing here is a very dramatic change of paradigm for society. It's not the issue of it is also the issue how we pay for care for elderly, for children, etc. It's what's important. And I think feminists have been saying it for many years, and the pandemic made all of us, men and women, live through it. At least, I don't know elsewhere, but in Mexico, men saw how much work care is. Some of them got involved. Some of them just saw it, watch it. But at least watching TV, but taking care of the children. But that's an experience that changed everybody. So that's why it's so much easier to talk about that now. So what is it we are saying when we say we want to build care societies, which is what came from the Buenos Aires Declaration from the Latin American and Caribbean Conference of ECLAC and UN Women, is that we want to change the paradigm to put at the center people. People care. The planet care, as Emilienne was saying. And that means that the other things that are at the center now get less value. The money, the competition, the production of things. And it is a very profound change. And of course we need data to show what we need to do, to show that we are on the path of doing it, to show that it is worthwhile because we will be recovering things. And every time we give a step forward, as I was saying to you, we get more questions. We need to understand better care workers, the variety of care workers, unpaid care work, but then when it's paid, how low it is for domestic workers, what rights they have, what's the continuum of care from home care to health care. So there's all these issues that we're starting to think in a more systemic and comprehensive way that are extremely important. And as part of the Global Alliance for Care, last week, ECLAC, with other partners, launched the Community of Practice for Measurement of the Care Economy. And the idea is that that group will develop strategies on how we can become care societies, what information we need, what data, what statistics, how to involve our statistics institutes or offices. So we are opening, and we'll be very happy if you, which are a crowd that are interested, join. The information will be in the Global Alliance for Care on how to join this community of practice. I think it's a fantastic time to join, to think together, we have many questions and nobody has answers, but we need answers very rapidly, and I'm sure we can have them if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to wait, remember?
No.
Please. I think we all agree with that. I mean, there are some wonderful points being made here, and I hope that they are stimulating to you. I don't know everybody's background in the audience, but I hope that this is provocative and that it gives you some ideas of things to take back to your countries, to your organizations, so that you have a chance to advance the cause for everybody. So, Buddy?
Thank you, Marjorie. Speaking about challenges in the African space, you have to start with the challenge of lack of resources. 24 African countries are currently debt distressed or in high risk of being debt distressed. So this is the overall context. And coming to unpaid care work, we usually say recognize, reduce, redistribute. ILO even goes beyond and says representation and also reward. In the African context, we are mostly at the first step, which is even recognizing what unpaid care work is. We are dealing with male-dominated policy-making spaces where the connection between unpaid care work on one side and lack of participation or reduced participation of women to political spaces and to economic and social opportunities, this connection still has to be made. And thank you for Nadine for talking about the paradigm shift that still needs to happen in most of the spaces. Unpaid care work is mostly overlooked by policymakers, and we know it's a key driver to gender inequality. But we should also talk about the opportunities. One opportunity is the Maputo Protocol that was signed by African Union countries, heads of state and government in 2003, 20 years ago, and entered into force in 2005. And this protocol aimed at combating all forms of discrimination against women, but it overlooks the issue of unpaid care work, where unpaid care work is one of the most common discrimination. It's one that starts at home, one that is normalized at home, and it has an implication over the most fundamental rights of women. When a woman or a girl is expected to cover most of the unpaid care work, she simply doesn't have the time to exercise her other rights. So the heads of states and governments' commitment through the Maputo Protocol to ensure education and training, this is from the protocol, education and training, access to justice, access to equal protection before the law, right to participation to political and decision-making processes, increased participation to peace and security processes, employment, access to economic opportunities, all these commitments, they are rendered non-effective because women do not have the time. And you can only wonder how many Ellen Johnson Sirleaf will not see their potential fulfilled. They will not be able to contribute to African development because they are busy. They are under 15, so it's not going even to be captured in some places, but they are busy fetching water, fetching wood, or bathing their younger siblings. So as Oxfam, we always are the critical friend. And as the critical friends, we say to African governments, you will not achieve the effective implementation of the Maputo Protocol if you don't take the appropriate measures to recognize, reduce, and redistribute women's unpaid care work. For everyone. Everyone.
I'm not going to stop. That's so important. We don't have much time left, and we still want to hear from Seema. But before we do, I just wonder if you had a wish for going forward, what gap would you like to see filled? If you, through data, through efforts, maybe you each have a closing idea. And Fadi, maybe we'll start with you and come this way.
Well, one issue that we're facing, and I think that Honorable Harriet would talk to this more, it's really the availability and quality of data and the paradigm shift that can drive policymakers and authorities to support the process more, because when you have to collect data, quality data, timely data, you have basically two choices. Either you go through authorities, so you need to have a quality entry point who will designate a focal point for you to work with, and then it's going to take time for them to also co-own the process. Or you can decide to go on your own, and this has been rendered a bit difficult in some spaces where reduction of civic space and also aggressive resource mobilization approaches, they will make authorities to tell you, you have to work through our National Statistics Bureau. So you are back in a situation where you are not in control of the time. And if you go as an international organization and try and collect data without the involvement of the authorities, the risk is that they will not buy in the results, especially if the results are not good. If they're good, then maybe they will overlook. But if you're in a space where you're saying they're not doing that great, then they will reject it, which is somehow...
So forgive my ignorance on this, because we'll come down the line. I just wonder if the kind of data that's being collected is similar from place to place. Not the way it's collected, but the kind. And Krista, you might have some thoughts about this too. Because it seems to me at the end of the day, we want to roll up this data to have some picture of what's going on in the world, even though it needs to be what I would say globalized, that it can't just be global data, it has to be localized. So I just wonder if you've relied on each other. I don't know if you all have been in touch with each other before, but I think it's really important. That's probably something that you have a thought about as well.
So yeah, that's a great challenge, because when you're trying to make the authorities co-own the process, you will engage with them. They will try and adjust the indicators, adjust the data to a way that makes sense to them, and you want to remain with standardized indicators so that you can compare from one space to another. So I'm only happy that Data2X is here. They can elaborate more on this, but this is a challenge that we have seen as well on the ground.
Nadine?
Well, what we had, there has been a very systematic work between the statistical offices in Latin America, and there are about 19 countries that have done at least one or two measurement of time use. And the effort has been also to standardize the methodology, etc. So I think we have good data to say that at least in Latin America, women work 3 times more than men in care and domestic work.
But also an impact, it's important to have this. Peter, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, a little bit on what's guided our policymaking and then some gaps. But I think like others, our National Statistical Authority has been instrumental in providing regular disaggregated data on women's work, paid and unpaid care. So for just maybe in the domestic context, for our early learning child care initiative that I mentioned earlier, which has been launched sort of province by province for over the last couple of years, it benefited both from international evidence and experience, but also from the experience that we saw over almost 25 years in the province of Quebec. So that was really significant input into how we've designed our own national system. the evidence demonstrates the value of access to affordable, high-quality childcare, creates jobs in the sector, supports child development, supports parents and especially mothers' labor force participation. And I'll just give you a data point here that I think is really quite stunning. So it's been estimated that if women in the rest of Canada participated in the labor force at the same level as Quebec, it would add approximately 250,000 workers to the Canadian labor force and raise real GDP by as much as 1.2% over the next 20 years. We also invest in data and research activities, dedicated funding to capturing data on early learning and childcare, research activities, $10 million a year on that. We have an ELCC, early learning childcare data and research strategy domestically. And then if I look at our international investments, we're implementing a project called Scaling Care Innovations in Africa. And this is with our International Development Research Center. And this is advancing gender equality, but it's doing so by scaling tested policies, experiments, innovations that foster recognition, reduction, and redistribution of women's unpaid care work. And evidence and data are at the forefront of this. And then maybe just a couple of gaps that we've come across. These include data with an intersectional lens, scalability and costing of some of the most promising interventions, and identifying approaches that work well in low-income contexts sustainably and that go beyond donor funding. I think I'll stop there.
So Harriet, you get the last word.
You saved the last.
The best for last, right?
Best for last. All right. Thank you very much. Within the Kenyan context, we rely on the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey and Time User Survey. And you find that in most cases, we don't have regular updates, or rather, they are not real-time updates. And that in itself gives us gaps. We also have the citizen approach in terms of generated data by CSOs. And this has helped immensely in guiding policy. And I must thank Oxfam because your organization has also come in big in supporting governments. And on our part, I jealously guard the space of Data 2X because of not only partnering with my office, but the fact that the initiatives that they have, not only in Kenya, but globally, I think it's very important. Kenya is a devolved government where we have about 47 counties. And Data 2X has partnered with us to do data mapping for about 7. So we need to scale it up. Out of the 47 counties, we actually need to have real-time data of about 21 so that we can know how best we are performing. And on top of that, we also have a need basis where we need to track how governments are performing, because it is one thing to plow in investments, but we also need to weigh the performance of the investments. So for me, I look at this issue of unpaid care work as good investments within governments. And this is one area that governments need to be supported, especially when it comes to injection of investments. So we also need to track performance, which is a key issue. And then within my office, since my work is largely coordination and advisories, you find that there's quite a bit of work that is going on. Everybody is doing something small, but we need to bring everybody and do proper coordination, because when we coordinate all the work that is going on, you find that we'll have more value, and every player will then have to, inject their energies towards the bigger performance instead of having piecemeal reporting structures. So with that, I think M&E is also very important. How do we track performance of each institution? How do we do proper coordination? And that is one of the gaps that my office has identified, and we have moved forward into doing coordination and having an all-government approach, because that is the one basis of the Kenyan government in terms of implementing the current programs that we have. So we are now moving towards an whole of government approach. The other thing I would wish to put across is that for a long time, governments have been reached with a long spoon. So we need to bring everybody on board. We need to court governments. And at the same time, we need to partner not only with CSOs, but with the private sector as well. So if we have an wholesome approach in terms of how we want to deal with societal issues, starting from conceptualization of programs, and we've seen a lot of value in that. You conceptualize together, you implement together. And by virtue of that, you have a whole approach in terms of the solutions that we want to give. So for me, I think that is it. If we can team up and work together, we'll be able to make this world a better place. So
Well,
thank you.
That's very fitting. Thank you very much. I learned a lot, and I appreciate all of that. So we're going to wrap up in just a minute, but before we do, I want to call Seema Jalan up, who's Deputy Director for Policy Advocacy Communications for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And Seema, you've spent your last 20 years advocating for women at the UN Foundation, which we worked very closely with Kathy Calvin and others, as Elizabeth, and as it's moved along. And also, you were Biden's representative recently at the 65th Commission on the Status of Women. So who better to help wrap us up? Thank you. Please.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to do a sound check for the closing. Still can hear us up there? Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to close this exciting discussion. Because I get to close, I get to do another round of thank yous to APCO and Marjorie. You're such an inspiration. I would love to read your book if you have any copies.
I sent a message that if...
Marjorie is here at the door. I'm waiting here with the box.
Okay, public service
Well, I don't know if
announcement.
people are going
There's
that way or
books in the
that
back.
way, but that's Virginia. She's my assistant. Be nice to her and she'll give you a book.
Excellent. And obviously, thank you so much to our very close partner, Data2X, the Global Alliance for Care, Oxfam, and of course, the government representatives we have here today from Canada and Kenya, and then our colleagues from Mexico. Thank you so much for all of this excellent conversation, not only for today's event, but just the day-in work on this over many years. And I have to say, as the closing commenter, there's a lot of unity in what's been discussed, and so I thought I would pull out a few key themes as we think together about next steps. And I'll just say from the Gates Foundation, which I'm privileged to represent here, we've really been focused on what can the Gates Foundation bring to this agenda in collaboration with governments and CSOs and the private sector. And we're really keying into a broader narrative and work on unleashing women's economic power and what it will take to actually achieve women's economic power. And of course, one of the most universal issues underlying that is access to quality care infrastructure. And making this case to economic and financial policymakers, which has come up so much during this discussion. How do you convince ministers of finance in different contexts, central bank governors, multilateral development banks, international financial institutions, which has been noted are still mostly led by men, and so there is a disconnect on the value of this work. So a few themes that I'd like to lift up is, clearly this is subsidizing our economies at the community level, the country level, the global level, but it's still not being counted as such in meaningful ways. The second is, especially in the context of lower and middle income countries that are facing such extreme debt distress or on the verge of extreme debt distress, as already been mentioned, this is really leaving impact on the table. It's holding back what women can be contributing to their economies and their societies and their own ambitions. The third is the piece around data and evidence, which has been the through line for everything discussed today, and what type of data and evidence is finally going to move those decision makers that are still ambivalent about this to actually take action. And we just worked with the Economist Impact Unit to come up with some new data supporting all of the great work that's already been discussed today about just that. They looked at countries around the world, looking at 15 different economies. And again, I mean, not surprising for this audience, investing in the care economy generates more than $1 trillion of additional GDP in just the next 5 years. So for all of us to realize that, and with the greatest gains, particularly for low and middle income countries, particularly Kenya and Nigeria. And I think the thing to pull out there is that even in highly resource-constrained environments, this is still an effective investment. It's not just about rich countries. And I'll just draw on one other thing that our co-chair, Melinda Gates, said in a panel yesterday, which is even for her, with the privilege that she has, and she's able to connect directly with heads of state in her many years doing advocacy on gender equality issues. The way she's been able to be effective is through data. It's what is needed to actually convince people at the highest levels. So I'll just say a few things, I think, to end on a high note, which is, all of us have been working on this for many years. As mentioned, I've been working on different issues for 20 years on gender equality. It's really significant that so many countries are talking about this. I mean, really amazing work from Mexico, Canada, Kenya, and other countries. They're talking about it at the highest levels. I think we should note that and be thankful and see that there's momentum there. We also were engaged in G20 and G21 conversations, and I'm sure folks saw just a week and a half ago that the world's largest economies, the G20, included care as part of their final document. I mean, that is really significant to note that. And there's actually going to be a new G20 working group on the empowerment of women. And for those of us who work on gender equality, what's significant about that working group is that it has the same seat at the table as the other working groups. And that's going to make a big difference, even as the handoff goes to the next G20 president. And the last thing is, this is what women want and need, and that's why we're all here. It's the most important element of it. And it's good for men too. I'm sure many of us were in Kigali for the Women Deliver conference where Ekimundo put out their State of the World's Fathers report. There's data that it's good for men to be involved in caregiving. So it's important to keep that. I'll just close by talking a little bit about the Foundation's role. Obviously, we're very, very invested with many partners here on this evidence generation. And what we're really focused on is what's going to work at scale, both public provision as well as employer provision, and really focus on what's going to benefit and work for women who live in poverty and their lives and their economic ambitions. The last I'll say is that I'm really excited that our co-chairs are using their voice on this issue. They have a really significant platform. And I also think, in terms of solutions, Marjorie, your question, we need more women in leadership positions, especially at economic institutions. So that's another area that we're working. And this is the last thing to say. Obviously, this has been such a privilege for me to join you. Just to close with an acknowledgement of all the caregivers here in the audience and listening. My younger sister has been a caregiver in a daycare for 20 plus years. Her work has always been undervalued and underpaid, but we have heard from so many children over the last 20 years how much she has changed their lives. Some of them are young adults now, some of them are future adults, and if it wasn't for people like her, I know I couldn't be here today. So thank you to everyone, and thank you for staying for this important discussion.
Thank you all for coming, and we appreciate it. I don't know if there's still some sandwiches and things out there, but you're welcome to mingle and learn from each other. But thank you very much, and thank you to these wonderful panels. One more round of applause now for the panelists. Thank you, you guys were great. You were really